Okay, good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our special council meeting of Monday, July the 15th. And as we begin today, I do wish to acknowledge that we are meeting tonight on the territory of the Sauk Nation. So we wish to acknowledge and thank them for sharing their territorial lands with us. So council, we do have an agenda here in front of us. So looking for approval of the agenda as it's circulated, please. Moved by Councillor McMath, seconded by Councillor Beddoes. Any questions about the agenda? See none, all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried unanimously. So that brings us to public question and comment section. And so that's here for members of the public, and we just have the one report. So are there any questions from members of the public tonight? Nope. Okay, so we'll move right into reports, into item 5. And that is our appointment of election officer for the by-elections. So I'll turn this over to Ms. Mushata, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. With the recent passing of Councillor Parkinson, Council is required to hold a by-election as soon as reasonable. So this is our first opportunity to bring forward a report. And from the appointment of the Chief Election Officer, a by-election must be held within 80 days. Some of the key dates are laid out in the report there for you. So with a target date of September 28th, we're recommending that myself be appointed as the Chief Election Officer and Patty Rear be appointed as the Deputy Chief Election Officer. And I think the rest is self-explanatory. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, so in terms of all the rules for advertising, campaign financing, is that all exactly the same as was in last year?
Exactly the same.
Exactly the same, okay. So then we have these dates in here. So general voting day would be Saturday, September 28th. Polls are 8 to 8, 2 advanced polls, mail-in option.
Yes, and the other thing I will mention is we have the nomination packages ready to go. So if anybody's interested, they can pick them up as of tomorrow morning.
Okay, so for those of you in the gallery, the nomination packages would be available tomorrow, as was said.
3 sets going out tomorrow.
And then the filing deadline is August the 23rd. Okay, and then everything is electronic, just as per normal, and results would be made, unofficial results would be available that evening.
That's correct.
Okay. So just as it was. Okay, any questions from members of council? Councillor McMath?
Can we move the recommendations together?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so then I move that council appoint Carolyn Mushata, corporate officer, as the chief election officer with power to appoint election officials as required for the administration and conduct of the 2019 local government by-election, and Patty Rear, deputy corporate officer, as the deputy chief elections officer for the 2019 local government by-election pursuant to section 544 of the Local Government Act, and that council receive the report for information.
Okay, moved by Councillor McMath, seconded by Councillor Beddoes. And did you have any questions or comments about the motion, Councillor McMath?
No.
Okay, to Councillor Bateman then?
Yeah, I was just curious. I know there's an 80-day period from the appointment of the electoral. But why did we choose September 28th?
Because the furthest date out is October the 5th, which would be right at the line, and unfortunately, we actually have some internal things programmed for staff that week, so that's why we've moved it up.
Councillor St. Pierre?
Through your worship to staff. Just curious, I forget how it was done previously. How is the public advised that the nomination packages are available and that the race is on, so to speak?
The information will be on our website, and we'll do a press release as well.
Yeah, just recommending that a media release goes up with the dates and the hours that members of the public could pick up the packages, and any reference, I guess, to Elections BC for information on signage, financing, and all that stuff. Could be in the package too.
Yeah, so sorry, there's questions on signage location and things like that are through our sign bylaw.
Right.
And then associated costs with the signage would be through the campaign financing, which is through Elections BC.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking more about what you have to include on the sign and
Yes.
all of those details. It's the same legislation that existed last year for labeling and the like. Okay, anything from anyone else? All right, I'll call the question then. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried unanimously. So that would just mean that councillors attending the UBCM, you'll need to vote in an advance poll. Or this, actually, I guess the Saturday. We would return on the Friday, so it would be the Saturday. But there is an advance poll if you want to do it before you go. Councillor St. Pierre?
Just one further question, just a general one, I think. What's the role of council in terms of the election, in terms of favoring any particular candidate, or what are the recommendations as far as that's concerned?
None?
None. All right.
I mean, you know, you can support a candidate if you so desire. I mean, there's nothing prohibiting you from putting signage on your lawn or anything like that. But, if you have a specific question, we can always talk about that further. But, I mean, typically there are no rules around endorsement.
Through your worship to staff, even as council, I mean, I know that we're not necessarily supposed to speak on behalf of council. There seems to be a bit of a strangeness there. If I step out as a councillor and say I don't support or do support any particular candidate.
It would be your own personal opinion that you'd be sharing. You couldn't speak on behalf of council.
No, well, that's just it. Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Okay, so then it would be that there's no new business, so looking for a motion to adjourn the special meeting. Moved by Councillor St. Pierre, seconded by Councillor McMath. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried unanimously. So stay tuned. We are going to switch into committee of the whole. We just need to switch the... We're good to go? It didn't, okay, so it's one video for both the special meeting and for the committee of the whole. Okay, so on that note, I'd like to call tonight's committee of the whole to order, please. And it's not special, this one was scheduled, committee of the whole, okay? And so this evening, we are pleased to welcome a representative from Victoria Foundation to present the Vital Signs report. And we all have a copy of said report here in front of us. And I'll turn it over, and we had allocated 10 minutes for the presentation, which is why it's at committee of the whole.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you to your fellow councillors as well for inviting me to speak this evening. My name is Rob Janis. I'm the Director of Communications with the Victoria Foundation. I'm going to just give you a brief presentation here on the screens, walk you through a little bit about what we are, but also mainly focusing on our 2018 Vital Signs report, of which you all have a copy, and I brought some extra copies for the public as well. So let's see if this works.
It's not signaling to anything.
Aha. There we go. Perfect. Okay, for those of you who are not familiar with the Victoria Foundation, we are the second oldest community foundation of almost 200 across the nation. We're 83 years old, and we were established through an act of parliament here in the capital. We do essentially four things. We manage donated funds from generous donors. We also take the returns on those funds and grant them out to charities in the form of grants and scholarships. And we work with organizations to strengthen them, charitable and nonprofit organizations. And we also do a kind of a nebulous role, which is bringing the community together around community issues as kind of a third party, a neutral third party, if you will. In terms of our endowment, As I mentioned, we are 83 years old, so we have over time accumulated a substantial amount of funds. We are currently around $345 million, and we take those funds and grant them out to charities when the returns on those funds. That makes us the largest non-government funder of charities in the region. To date, we've returned about $225 million in the form of grants or scholarships. Last year alone, we gave out more than 1,000 grants, totaling over $23 million to 472 organizations. These include many organizations in the Souk area, I might mention. So organizations like the Harmony Project of Souk, the Souk Philharmonic Society, Souk Family Resources Society, Souk Hospice, and many others. As I mentioned, we work to strengthen organizations. We do this mainly through working to improve their financial, organizational, and governance strength. And lastly, in terms of this work we do with community, we really work to try and solve some of the bigger problems in the region, things like homelessness, food security, literacy. These are the kinds of issues that we tackle and bring others together on. Moving on really to the purpose of my being here today is to talk to you about vital signs. This is our signature report. We put it out every year and have done so for the last 14 years. Basically what it does is it brings together perceptions and facts. The survey of the public is done every year, which equates to how people feel about the region and what their thoughts are on these issues. And then we marry that together with statistics and data from a range of sources across the region and beyond. In terms of representation from the Souk area in that survey, we usually see around 4 to 5% of the survey respondents from the area, which represents around 80 to 90 people in a given year. Every year it ranges, of course, the survey, but we're somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,500 to 2,000 people as a whole. Our goal with the publication has always remained the same, really to connect philanthropy with community needs and resources and opportunities. And each year we take a signature kind of feature report or feature approach to the report. So this last year we looked at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which I'm sure you're familiar with. There's a full breakdown of how we've done that throughout the report on page 13. I'd like to just briefly walk you through some of the kind of questions that we ask, and you might question yourself as to how you might have responded if you took the survey or you didn't take the survey, just to get a flavor for what we do. So we ask some questions like these around quality of life. How connected do you feel to your community in Greater Victoria? The respondents that came back last year were mostly very connected or somewhat connected. But there were, of course, a few that were not connected at all. We also ask questions like this, which is how often do you feel uncomfortable or out of place? This gets to the heart of issues around discrimination. Most people do not feel discriminated against in our region, so never or rarely representing the bulk of respondents. But, you know, concerningly, we do find that there is a small percentage that is frequently or consistently, that's 9% combined, that are feeling discriminated against. Another question again at quality of life, do you feel supported by loving family and friends? This really gets to the heart of the sense of belonging in our region. And again, we see strong representation from the public indicating that they are feeling supported. But again, we do find the outliers here where you're seeing 5% disagree or strongly disagree. So we take those issues very much to heart. I'm going to gloss over this cluster analysis information here quickly. This is really just information that gets to some of the technical analysis we do with the data. When we do the survey, we do group information together and use it internally and share that with partners. What I do want to mention is this issue around Greater Victoria's most important issues. So every year this will change. We have the top 12 list is in the report, but and you can find that on page 17. But it's important to note that these are issues that are strongly supported by people in terms of what they believe are the things that we should be working on the most. Cost of living, housing, transportation being perennial top favorites here. We also ask what are the best things about Greater Victoria, and these things tend to not change that much. Our natural environment, climate, air quality, those kinds of things tend to be quite consistent, as I'm sure they are out here in Souk all the time. In terms of the areas that are graded, so the public is asked to grade each issue area as well, give it a letter grade. And we always see quite consistent response here too, at least in the last number of years. We have seen arts and culture and sports and recreation both coming in at a B+. And perhaps not surprisingly, housing coming in the lowest at a C- last year. And that's pretty consistent. We do see the lowest grades coming in housing all the time. Here's a question you might ask yourself this one. What percentage of the local population 18 years and older reported having a body mass index of 30 or higher? This is the threshold for obesity. So we put statistics in that would tell you the answer to this question. The answer actually is 20%. And 20% or 26% is the rate for Canada as a whole, and 12% is the percentage of youth aged 12 to 17 on South Vancouver Island who reported being overweight or obese, which is, I might say, well below the rate of 26% for youth in BC and Canada. So we are doing quite something right with the youth in terms of obesity rates anyway. This is another question that I like to ask folks. It gets to the heart of some of the issues. What was the sexual assault rate for Greater Victoria last year in terms of violations per 100,000 population? It's not something people often think about, but the result is quite stunning. 79. This compares to 67 for Canada and 56 for BC. And if you're thinking that's quite high, we did too. And we did pose that question to the Victoria Sexual Assault Centre to get some answers, if you will. They did have some good insights. A couple of things that are really the main factors they believe are that the high population of young students, college age and university age students, does tend to push that number up. But probably the most important fact is that we have the only sexual assault clinic in BC in Victoria. And so you're actually seeing rates that are reported a little bit higher probably as a result of that. We do talk about these kinds of issues on our podcast as well. We have a podcast that sort of complements Vital Signs Report. So every month we dig into the issues by asking experts around our region to come in and do an interview with us, and then we do a field report as well from an on-location site. And we did look at this issue. And you can find those podcasts on Apple iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. A couple more quick questions. What is the child poverty rate for the region? It's actually 15%. This equates to about 8,720 children. It surprises a lot of people. 11% is the percent of seniors living in poverty. 13% is the number of citizens as a whole living in poverty in our region. And perhaps most shockingly, 29 is the percent of single-parent families living in poverty in Greater Victoria. 1 in 3. Throughout the report, you'll see these large photos with captions. These are just a snapshot of some of the things that the Victoria Foundation is doing, whether through a granting program, a convening program, working with partners, what have you. And it just gives you an idea of what some of the initiatives that we're working on. And that really is the end of my presentation. We do make a lot of effort to try and get this information out to the public, and I would encourage Council to bring this information up when you get a chance and use it at your discretion where it is you would find it useful. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
That's great. Thank you very much for the presentation and for bringing this out to us. So I'd like to open it up for members of council. Questions or comments? Councillor Beddoes and St. Pierre.
Thank you for that report, by the way. It's very comprehensive, very useful. Job well done. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Councillor St. Pierre.
I was curious about a few things. One of them was, how do you change your questions and data sources over time? So you've done this many, many times. I assume things have evolved. There'd be one question, because obviously you're doing a report that can be compared, year by year. So how much change do you allow, and how do you manage that?
Very good question, thank you. In terms of the survey side of things, we do work with the survey agency to make sure that the data is accurate. In the last report, it's plus or minus 2%, 19 times out of 20. For those statisticians out there, it means that basically it's very accurate, and we do randomize the questions to make sure that there's no biases in place and things like that to ensure that the questions are done well. In terms of the data itself, it really comes down to the quality of the sources. As you might be very familiar with, I'm sure, when you're looking for information on regional activities or SUC-related activities, surveys, Stats Canada data, BC Stats, things like that aren't done on a very regular basis, sometimes 5-year cycles or even longer. And so for us, it's really searching out good data and trying to find the most up-to-date information. We work with all kinds of sources throughout the region, Capital Regional District, individual municipalities like yours, and many, many other sources, trying to get population level data. So we're not looking for, programmatic data or things like that, but really population impact level data.
Yep. We had a presentation from Dr. Brian White in terms of potentially doing a report for SUC. And I was curious as to whether or not the format that was here, more or less exactly these particular areas would be covered, or are we looking at more flexibility in terms of what we might like to see in addition in such a report?
I think that's, I did speak with Dr. White, and he'd given me the information on what he was talking about with doing here. And I did suggest that, this is a regional report, so if you're looking for something more specific, we're happy to assist. But I couldn't say in terms of what, the ultimate plan would be to execute for this. I think it would come down to, what resources you had and then what sort of outcomes you're looking to solve to direct that. I think it comes down to, the right product for the project you're looking to undertake. If you're looking to do more quality of life sort of assessment, I think then, there's ways to do that. We have done some expanded survey work that's working with the Canadian Institute of, the CIW, the Canadian Institute of Wellbeing in University of Waterloo, and where it's a lot more thorough type of analysis. It's essentially 64 different domains of quality of life, whereas we have 12. So it can get really, really deep into that. And I think it's those kinds of questions that have to be asked in terms of what you're actually looking for to get out of this work. And of course, everything is commensurate. The amount of work in is price as well. So we're fortunate in that our publication is heavily sponsored from companies around the region. And we also have some donors that provide funds directly to support the publication. But that's a question that I think is going to have to be asked.
So what I'm hearing is that a SUC-specific report wouldn't necessarily be constrained by the parameters of this report.
Absolutely not. No, this report is done under license from Community Foundations of Canada, who holds the trademark for vital signs, and those are only open to community foundations. It's not available to other entities. So any other kind of survey, any other kind of report that looks at quality of life, those kinds of things could certainly be done. It wouldn't be done within the parameters of vital signs.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other Councillor Bateman, then McMath.
Yeah, thank you very much. I've always enjoyed vital signs, particularly the Village of 100. Always this perspective setter. And to know that the newlywed, nearly dead cliche does not apply to Greater Victoria, as it turns out. So I'm just curious about some of the applications in your experience by NGOs, academic institutions, local governments, with the material that you produce. Can you give us some examples of, yeah.
Absolutely, thank you. We work with many, many, many organizations, and each year we more and more come online. So certainly local governments use our report for decision-making. We've worked very closely, for example, with the City of Victoria recently on a number of issues. We're working with the South Island Prosperity Project. We helped them put together their bid for $10 million for a transportation-related initiative through the federal government. They weren't successful in that bid, but I think they will be successfully putting together some initiatives that come out of there. We work with a lot of other charitable organizations, those that both fund and take funds. So, for example, the TELUS Board, Community Board. We work with the University of Victoria, who uses the information to help guide their research work in many cases, right down to individual schools. This last year, I presented at St. Michael's University School's Economic 12s class, for example, which incorporated it right into the curriculum. And that's typical. We have many, many schools who do that kind of thing. So it's across the board. There's a full range of organizations that use the information, at least as a starting point. It is a snapshot. It's done at one point in time. It is certainly not as dynamic as we would like it to be. But I do think it helps many organizations kind of at least get a foothold into some issues, what's happening, and then take it from there. They can delve a little deeper, and we often help them do that.
A couple of quick questions. Now, you say about 80 people in the Souk region took part. Is there any way you can parse that out and submit it to the district for our...
We don't.
No.
It's not part of our analysis to try and do something on a municipal by municipal level. And you would, to be honest with you, if you were trying to use that, it wouldn't be statistically accurate at the population level either.
Right.
You would really need probably around 300 or so. Okay. I would consult with our survey agency on this, but. Yeah, you wouldn't want to rely on any of the information that came out of that. It's just not enough numbers to be statistically accurate.
And your 2019 survey, is that complete now? Or is
it did close on
yeah.
the July 1st weekend, that's
Okay.
right. And we just, in fact, today, I just got the top line report back from the survey, and there's some very interesting results coming out of there. I have to say it's starting to look a little more interesting than last year. Okay. So I can't wait to get the full report in about a week. But yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councillor McMath?
Hi. We're always looking at engaging the community. I was just curious, so in one of the first questions, it says, how connected do you feel to community in Greater Victoria? What is the number that defines Greater Victoria? And out of that number, what is the participation percentage?
So if I follow you correctly, you're talking about the number, the population number that we're working with?
Yeah, what is your total number as you define Greater Victoria?
So, so we work within the boundaries that are geographically defined by the Capital Regional District. So they're governance boundaries as defined. And so I don't have the number off the top of my head, but thank you. It's their population numbers, and I know that changes from time to time.
And what is the participation percentage out of?
Yeah, so we don't actually calculate that percentage. It's a very good question because a lot of people don't think like that. That's very good because most surveys, what you do is you're trying to do a randomized survey. Mm-hmm. And as a result, you're taking a percentage of the population and surveying those so that you get an accurate representation. Our survey is a little bit different. It's a self-selected population. So we advertise widely, promote the survey link widely, and then anybody that wants to take it can take it. So as a result, we don't come at it from the angle of saying, let's get a certain percentage. What we try and do is open it up as much as possible to the public. What we do is we do put that back to our survey analysis company and say, well, how statistically accurate is that at the numbers that we get? And that's where we get the number I mentioned earlier, the plus or minus 2%, 19 times out of 20. And we have augmented that in the last year, and we're doing it again, we did it this year, by doing a panel survey in addition to the randomized, the open-ended survey. So what this is essentially, it's a group of people that have agreed to be surveyed over time on any number of surveys. And so they feed their demographic information into a database, and then the survey company selects them to be a microcosm, kind of Village 100, if you will, a microcosm representing Victoria. So of those, and in our case, it's 400 people, and there are certain thresholds that would be the equivalent, sort of 400, if there were only 400 people in Greater Victoria. So, it'll be sort of 51% female, 49% male, all down the scale in terms of demographics. So we don't come at it from that perspective, but it
Okay.
does lead us to the same result. I hope that answers your question.
Other questions from members of council? I'm curious, or go ahead, Councillor St. Pierre.
Honestly, just another quick one. I noticed that in your sustainable development goals, you had 4 of them that were not applicable. Why was that?
Yeah, the difficulty there is that we were trying to be very strict in the application of the SDGs. So what I mean by that is we wanted to be sure, in the past, we sort of just noted the SDGs that might be equated to an area that, of quality of life or an area of civic activity. This time, what we actually did is we said, no, let's be much more specific and much more strict and follow essentially, there's a Canadian equivalent to the Sustainable Development Goals that's been developed, which has both the 17 goals and then kind of the equivalents or proxies for the 169 targets that are associated with those goals. And what we did in this case was we were more strict to say, okay, we're only going to say that these are associated with the goals if we can make a true link to them. So each one of the indicators throughout, as you see throughout the report, many of them will have a number, or in some cases more than one number associated with them, because it really does link to an actual target within those goals. And what that means is that if we're being that strict, there were some that we just didn't have data that up in this round of the survey, or the report. We don't always have data in every area. It's just not available. It comes down to those cycles I mentioned earlier, or in some cases it's just data that just simply isn't available for our region. The age-old problem of being a community of 13 municipalities and 3 electoral areas and multiple levels of government means we don't get the kind of data that a city like Calgary might get, where they can, get one police force, one fire department, one municipal waste arrangement, on and on and on. And in many cases also StatsCan data makes available data because for that, or health service area data is made available for those kinds of regions that aren't available to us because they get treated specifically as one entity. So it's a challenge for us all the time, and it showed up in this case in the SDGs, where we simply weren't able to find indicator data linked to some of the SDGs. You're welcome.
Just a question, when will the 2019 survey is just closed, when do you usually produce the report?
So the report comes out the first Tuesday of October every year.
First Tuesday of
Yeah,
October?
in this case, it's October 1st for 2019. And we have a launch event, of which I know an invitation does go to yourself and council to send a representative, and usually about 150 guests in attendance to launch that, and then we promote it widely from there.
Okay. And I'm just curious, just year over year, are we, with some of the items that came up before, cost of living, housing, transportation, those all seem like, they've been regional issues for quite some time. So is that sort of like a trend that we're seeing, or is something shifting?
It's a good question. Every year things do shift.
Yeah.
Certain issues remain, however, and seem, intractable, if you will. As you, I'm sure, experienced on council, housing issues, cost of living issues, things like mental health, more and more addictions, those kinds of things are showing up more in the surveys. But others have been around for a long time, and I don't think they're going away anytime soon either. We do make note of the differences and try and do some further analysis on linking maybe some of the demographic information that we can and seeing if there's something that we can pop out there. I alluded to the segmentation analysis that I kind of whipped through the slides there. That kind of stuff is available online as well for every year. And it does help us to kind of understand those kinds of shifts a little bit better, where we can link certain groups of issues with certain segments of the population. So, for example, seniors of a certain financial means will feel a certain kind of way, whereas younger people of a different kind of financial means or even some other demographic element might be experiencing a different kind of set of challenges. And we can pull that out of the data and then use that in our work and try and share that with others to use it in their work as well.
I know.
It can get quite deep and complicated.
It can. Well, there's also the stories sort of behind the numbers, where you shared the one that we have the only sexual assault center, and it's the case of encouraging people to report, and will then, of course, result in a higher number of reports. But that's because they have the courage to share that. So that's a good sign, even though the number is high. I don't know if that makes sense, but the fact that it is being reported as opposed to not being reported. And with mental illness, we're talking more about it. We're trying to bring more awareness and to create more space for individuals to come forward or families to come forward and talk about it so that we can match and support the health. So in some ways, the numbers may be higher, but in the same case, I think that's a good thing, because then we're having the conversations that we didn't have, say, 20 years ago.
And I think what you're touching on is exactly the power of this report, is that
Yes.
it gets people talking about those kinds of things. It may be a selection of indicator data, but it does drive you deeper into the issues and often, cross over into other things. And that's both true on the indicator side, the data side, and on the survey side as well. I can tell you a little foreshadowing for this next report. Today's, when I was pouring through my top line report, one of the most interesting things was a disconnect that seems to be showing up around people's, the issue of transportation. There's been a lot of effort, at least in the downtown core and some of the core municipalities, around installing bike lanes, which should be a good thing. But it's actually showing up as a very negative sentiment among surveyors, that they're actually seeing a solution to transportation is to stop having so many bike lanes. So there's a need there that you can see that it's maybe not around the physical structure, but around working with the public to understand the issues and to start to dialogue better and to, do something more on educational side, et cetera. But this has happened in the past too, where, we'll get a disconnect where in past years, I remember about 6 years ago, we had a really low rating on the economy, and yet economically, Victoria was doing very, very well, very low unemployment rate, salaries were high, a bunch of things were going really well. And the president of the chamber at the time said, this is wrong, this isn't right at all, this report's all wrong. And we came back and said, well, the report is right, what's wrong is that people don't understand the connection, and there's still a very real sentiment among the public, and that requires some attention. And I think that's exactly the direction they went in. So it's those kinds of things which, are the nuggets within the report, really, are those kinds of disconnects or things that shed a little interesting light.
There's also work being done locally to establish the Souk Region Foundation as well. There's some volunteers that are working on it and are looking at the Victoria Foundation model. So it'll be interesting to see over time how that comes. But in the meantime, we are thankful for the support and the grants that are coming back into our community for those projects and the many others. So we appreciate that.
Thank you. You're very welcome. And I hope that's very successful. I know that the Machosen Foundation, for example, is a good model there, and we've worked very closely with them to be a growing and concern that's doing very great things out in their community. Yeah.
Any other questions or comments from members of council? Is there anything from members of the public? Okay, well, thank you very much for your time with us today. I'll just, do we need a motion to receive the report? We're good? Okay. We appreciate you coming out and for bringing this and all that information. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, and safe travels home for you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Okay, so our next item here is upcoming and past conference reports. So members of council here had all attended the Federation of Canadian Municipalities together earlier, well, I guess a month or so ago, and we are in the process now of preparing and registering for the Union of BC Municipalities. So because our meetings have been so busy, there may have been we haven't done council updates, and I just wanted to be cognizant that there may be information that councillors wanted to download from that conference experience. So just to provide that opportunity, and then also just to begin some preparatory work for upcoming UBCM. So I'll start with FCM first. If there is anything from any members. Councillor Beddoes. Okay.
Actually, I was actually very, very surprised, and the information I got out of it. I went on 2 major tours. The first one is their incineration plant, which is odd because the reason I went there is that we are looking into garbage and sewage out here, and I wanted to see how Quebec City did it. And I was really, really surprised when I went to their plant, and I have a diagram of it here. The first thing I learned is they don't sort anything. Everything goes into dumpsters. The dumpsters go to the incineration plant burns it, collects the metal, collects the steam, dries the sewage, then burns the sewage, the hard matter from the sewage. Very efficient plant, by the way, but it was pretty scary. Huge big tongs of garbage and propane tanks exploding. Well, no, it was. They throw propane tanks and they blow up, and they got the big thick glass that protects them. And it said the most dangerous thing are aerosol cans. They go like rockets. But I was quite surprised that that's how they handled it. But they said, this was sort of educational for me too, is that Quebec City, 60% of the residents live in apartments. So it's very difficult for them to sort their cans, bottles, organics, all that sort of stuff, as we do, because most of the homes here are single family. And their best solution was to burn it. And they're still going to burn it. But they explained it very, they recover as much as they can. They have scrubbers to take out all the chemicals they can. Obviously, it still spews out carbon dioxide. But it was a very efficiently run organization. And then I went to, on the same tour, they took us over to the new biomethane recovery plant. And they're going to build this plant that will take all their sewage, and then they're going to start recycling their kitchen scraps, and they're going to produce methane gas with it. And the byproduct, the dry byproduct, is going back to the incinerator to be burned. But it was an interesting approach, and again, it was great for me, learning of what may be some possibilities for us in the future. Not saying burning is the way to go, but just interesting to see how another municipality handled it. The other one I went to is the urban forest, and that again was a tour, another eye-opener. And the reason why I went on the urban forest one was we're talking about a tree bylaw here. In fact, we're getting down to the nitty-gritty in that. So I thought it was important to understand how other communities handle their tree bylaws. I was kind of alarmed to find out when I got on the bus and we're going around the city, they only have 2 types of trees in Quebec City, elms and maples, basically. And they have a terrible, terrible time with this Dutch elm disease, and they're losing 80% of them. And it was interesting to hear the biggest problem they have with this is convincing people on private property that they have to take down their trees. And I thought that was quite interesting because I see a problem here with the tree bylaw with people in the private property. There it's different is because the city's telling them to take them down, and we may be telling them to keep them growing the way they are. But again, it was interesting to see. I must say, I was very, very impressed with the city of Quebec and what a beautiful place it was and how they tackle problems. Thank God we had our interpreter, Councillor St. Pierre, with us to help us out at times. But all in all, and the last thing that I wanted to take away is that what a tremendous opportunity we have for lobbying the federal government, because we had not only the Prime Minister there and the Leader of the Opposition, but they were there to listen to the municipalities. And a lot of the motions that were put forward shows you the power of the combination of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. And I suspect we're going to find the same thing at UBCM with the BC ones. So all in all, I found a very worthwhile exercise. That's it. Thank you.
Councillor Logans.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak about it. So for specifically for FCM, there were a few standout moments for me. One of them was a session that was a forestry presentation that had a panel, and it was a very interesting panel, but one panelist was representing Weyerhaeuser, and they were faced with the challenging question about whether they're impacting, like their organization is impacting climate change. And the panelist stated, it was quite funny, she said, "I don't believe in climate change, but the climate is changing." And I had to just like center myself at that moment. But I understand that it was poorly stated, but I believe the intent was to say that the company was not responsible for the changes that they were experiencing or that we're experiencing in our climate. It was just a very strange way to put it, and it gave me a good sense of where they're at as an organization. But it was also interesting to see how the forestry solutions that were exampled as best practices seem to be just that, some of the few best practices, and not necessarily what we actually see reflected in our own communities here. So they would show slides of forest management systems where there are patches of trees left in strategic ways so that deer and other animals can move through them. But I know like we don't have a lot of that represented here, as well as it was depicted in those images. Another highlight, interestingly enough, was the Elizabeth May's speech for the Green Party. I love listening to all the speeches. That's one of my favorite parts. But it was interesting because there was a strong presence of people wearing energy shirts that were specific for oil and gas industry throughout the conference, and it's fine, and I had conversations with them, and it was very interesting. But it was specifically interesting in this speech because May was able to connect the environmental issues to each party's platform, which helped people in the oil and gas industry join in the standing ovation, and I found that very interesting, just as a side note. But it was a great moment where no matter what your political affiliation is or was, there was recognition that changes need to happen and that no one needed to be left behind in the process. So that should be interesting, seeing how that plays forward. But the most interesting part for me was the forum on the housing affordability crisis, because it was a room packed full of people, and I can't remember how many there were. There must have been 200 or 300 people, at least. And a large majority of that room, I think it was over 80% of the room when we did a show of hands, represented British Columbia. So for a federal conference, for a vast majority to be representing British Columbia was a bit shocking. I fully expected that more provinces would have been represented, even just out of interest to see what could be done to mitigate the issues leaking into their provinces, but it demonstrated that it was very much a BC issue, more so than anywhere else in Canada, even Ontario, shockingly. But the presentations were excellent, with statistics and research from McGill that were really real and raw and put our situation into perspective. For example, the impacts that Airbnb have on Canada's housing market and how it correlates to the housing crisis. And Selena Robinson, our Minister of Affairs was able to provide some really positive examples of how housing is being addressed in BC. However, and I think it was done in an effort to say this is what British Columbia is doing, except the room was full of people from British Columbia. So after the presentation, I find some of the conversations you have one-on-one with other people who are attending the conference are just as meaningful as these big group discussions. So after the presentation, it was interesting speaking to other elected officials within the communities that the provincial housing initiatives were taking place, because some of them were supportive and finding the projects helpful, while others were not supportive and found the projects created more challenges than benefits. Or it was also stated by someone, I forget who it was actually, unfortunately, that the facts of the project were not fully represented to describe the challenges that were taking place. So it was more just a happy conversation about what was happening instead of a real conversation about what was happening. So granted, like, this is all new for us as a province as well. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of information comes forward as we actually start to see reports on how these things play out. But yeah, that's my report. Sorry for talking so fast.
Okay. Other comments from members of council? Councillor Bateman?
Okay. I failed to print out my overview statement, so I'm going to ramble here, which is perhaps not surprising, Al, Councillor Beddoes.
I didn't either, mine was rambling.
So I found it a very immersive experience. There were 3,800 people at this convention center. 2,100 of them were delegates. 357 were from BC. And what I learned was sort of this history of how the FCM and municipalities in general are slowly but surely establishing themselves as power players within the federal, provincial, municipal structure. Back in 2003, the government of the day gave municipalities $125 million. And today it is up around $5 billion. So things have shifted, and I think it's thanks to UBCMs and FCMs and their lobbying efforts to ensure that there is more stable, long-term, predictable funding coming to local governments, as opposed to applying for it. It's an appropriation. Is that the right terminology? Yeah, so, and that continues to be a lobbying effort, and each of the major political leaders in an election year did commit to continuing that policy. Yeah, I met a whole bunch of people. As Ebony says, Councillor Logan says, those one-on-ones were fascinating. The gentleman from Redwood Meadows, Alberta, which is a fascinating little community that's been hard hit. They've had flooding. They've, major infrastructure damage to these. Emergency preparedness was an issue that came up repeatedly. There's been flooding, wildfires. We've got away with it really, really effectively here, fortunately. Touch wood. And yet, I have a quote here somewhere: "Be prepared for the impossible" was the message coming out of how asset management builds climate resilient communities. That was one of the ones I attended. We must be prepared for the impossible, and in our case, it's the earthquake, right? Predictably, and possibly a wildfire story coming here one day. There are some all sorts of grants, and of course the chief is on to the UBCM grants, asset management planning, a number of other options. I attended the session on sponsorships, festivals, fairs, annual events. There are opportunities to bring in kind of branding, if indeed that's something I was thinking, sitting there listening to that presentation, the Souk's not really a kind of town where we bring in GM to sponsor our community picnic, but maybe not. 6 out of 10 Canadians believe municipalities should seek corporate sponsorship as a source of revenue. I attended something on smart cities, which is a whole nother world that escapes me, the man who has trouble with his laptop, iPad. But smart water leak detection is a big deal. Apparently 15% of the total water entering the country's supply line system is lost to leaking pipes. And there are new and improved ways to detect that and stop these problems. It's also, yeah. I could, again, it was immersive, and it was a great bonding opportunity with you all, and it was a bit overwhelming, I acknowledge, and I don't think I need to go to Toronto next year. I think I would suspect that we went as a pack this year, which was fantastic, and in future, I think the mayor needs to go, of course, and maybe just one or two others. I will certainly sit the next one out, given that what I find, there's so many, all these issues relate to us here in micro form. However, I found to a degree that it's kind of complicated, my headspace. I mean, I've got to pay attention to the issues in the CRD as an alternate director and our local issues, and then bringing in all this other information has kind of, it's a learning curve too far for me, to a degree. So that's my report. I'm really glad I went, and I feel it's fascinating. There are so many local government representatives in this country, and it was good to sort of swim with that crowd for those 3 days. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Bateman. Other comments from Councillor St. Pierre? Councillor, go ahead.
I'll be brief, because I think we've actually mentioned a few things in prior councils, but that's okay. One of the things that did strike me quite strongly was that the representation that BC brought to FCM actually was more than Quebec, which has a much larger population. And that in terms of actually passing resolutions and putting things forward, that does make a bit of a difference. So seemingly we had more political power at that level than we might otherwise, simply because of the number of reps we actually sent, which was quite cool. The Climate Leadership Caucus had incredible representation, but again, 80% of the room was BC. So there was just this thing happening there as well. So we were well represented. I believe that we probably need to keep on representing in the future, simply to keep on working with other people that are making the decisions, because some of those decisions need to be made at a provincial and national level. And I found that specifically in terms of things like climate change and the resolutions, I think at least 2/3 to 3/4 of the resolutions were climate related. And quite frankly, I would dislike to see only people with energy t-shirts in that room, because that might not be what we actually want to see happen. Just as a comment. I found it interesting to find out what was happening in Ontario with Premier Young and, Ford, keeping federal monies away from municipalities, and how most of the party leaders were then talking about how they had to strengthen links directly to municipalities in order that those monies should travel without having to go necessarily through the province in that particular way. So I think he's done all of us a favor by potentially creating an incentive to strengthen ties between the feds and municipalities in terms of allowing the free flow of money. So that's an interesting sort of silver lining to what's happening in Ontario. Found it interesting to focus on broadband as a driver for local economic development. So the idea that areas, for example, like Port Renfrew, Otter Point, wherever, really need broadband in order to actually strongly develop their economies quickly. But then when you have an entire room of people that are basically screaming for it, and some of them are coming from northern communities, it becomes much more clear. So this was a good way to sensitize ourselves to what's happening elsewhere, the differences and the things that are in common, and some of the solutions that we actually can use. Sorry, this was sort of what I pulled out as people were chatting, so this is what I've got.
Anything from Councillor McMahon?
My co-councilors have done a fantastic job of outlining the conference. The one thing I just wanted to touch on was BC's participation rate is in the high 90s. And so for now, we have sort of a loud voice there. the participation rate for other provinces is quite low. So while we may push the priorities now, that's quickly going to change. So I think the next couple of years are incredibly important to participate, and although maybe feels overwhelming, I think it's incredibly important that we go and that we participate while we have the chance, because once they fill their seats and once they hop on, like, we are basically at max capacity for participation, and there are a couple provinces right next door who are only touching in at like 40%. So that strength is going to change quickly, and sort of with the elephant in the room, with the pipeline, now these next couple of years are incredibly important. So that's just the one comment I wanted to make.
So thank you, members of council. So with the membership, BC does have, I think all but one municipality belongs to the FCM. It doesn't mean that every councillor actually goes to the conference, but they are a member, and in that way they're sort of representative. And you're right, other provinces have a lower participation rate, which means that they don't attend at all. They don't get any of the bulletins. The resolution process at FCM and UBCM will be completely different. So it was only, I think, an hour long at FCM, where we have several blocks of days. It's a record level of resolutions that are coming at UBCM this year that need to go through. And also the board of FCM will also process a lot of resolutions and take them through the board structure, and so not all of them go onto the floor. So there's a bit of a process difference. In terms of advocacy days, though, they're very similar. UBCM adopted the FCM strategy, so that's where in Ottawa, everyone meets with as many MPs as senators as possible, province to province to province. So when I was there, it was BC Caucus met with BC MPs and senators, because we have a relationship with, and there are elected representatives, so it goes across by province. But across the country, the messaging is the same. So one of them has been a consistent request to ask for a change in the relationship between local government and the federal government. So a lot has been downloaded on us. We're not receiving the tools with it, and we want that. And that's where the gas tax agreement was a UBCM success under President Sav Dhaliwal, to actually have that in writing and to actually have an agreement, so we know what that is. But it's continuous, and we're asking for that to change. The big one being the cannabis revenue. So this is a revenue stream that has now been legalized within the community. So the federal government responded by stating 70% would flow through to municipalities. We haven't seen any money yet. So now we're taking that up with the province, but also still putting pressure on the federal government. So it's great that you made that agreement with the province. We're not seeing it. So you need to refresh that agreement, and we want to see a flow through so it's not getting stopped. I think only Quebec is doing a flow through. No one else has seen anything yet, even though the product is in our communities and we're doing all the costs on it. The province has costs as well, but that's sort of what's happening there. I haven't attended every FCM. I think maybe one or two per term. It just happens. Life happens, and there's other things that are happening. So it's a case where you have a sense of what that looks like. And next year, I mean, it'll be interesting because we have a federal election. So now, what is that change going to look like? And then where's the advocacy going to go? This year and previous years, the Prime Minister attended. Other years, there was no Prime Minister. They would send somebody else that would speak on behalf of the government. So it just changes year to year. Sometimes MPs stay and sometimes they don't. I have heard that because Minister Robinson was part of the housing panel, that's what drew a lot of British Columbians to hear what she had to say. And also, since the housing is coming into their communities, how is that side of the story being shared? So it is still a crisis across the country, but I think the audience was interested in hearing the provincial perspective and what was being communicated out. For myself, I went to one on media and communications, and in the world of social media where it's changing, I found that to be insightful. And then I was also a participant on the cannabis panel. So I was actually one of the panelists and gave the local government perspective on the panel there, which got good reviews, so that's nice. And some follow-up questions have come my way there as well. So that's been interesting. But I'm glad that you all attended and had the experience. And and, you know, hopefully got something out of it. I'm still sort of processing all the stuff that I picked up from the trade show and some follow-up queries, and then even seeing, you know, what technology is relevant or available in BC versus elsewhere. But there's no way of covering that entire trade show. It's massive. Councillor St. Pierre?
On the subject of the trade show, I found the same thing. I tried to cover it, and I think I got through about half of it. One thing that I would like to see, and maybe in future years, if we could actually have some kind of plan where between us all, we can maybe hit all the vendors and all the exhibits, because one of the reasons that I found it really useful was that there were opportunities to save the district a lot of money. I found out about grant opportunities, about things that we could do that could save us a lot of money. And this is a lot of money to go to these things, so this is actually a good way of actually trying to make sure we have a value-added proposition where we can actually make it worth our taxpayers' while. But I couldn't hit every booth, and I don't think anyone did, so something I'd love to see is just a little bit of a plan so we can actually hit them all and hopefully glean what we can. Just,
Yeah, and take the map and cut it into sections.
yeah, whatever.
Yeah. Okay, so any other pieces on FCM? Okay, so it is in Toronto next year, as you know, and just the board is comprised of all provinces, and then UBCM president, first vice are on the board automatically, and then we elect our directors of large, of which we did, which is sort of a cross-section across the province, I think, are representing us on the board, including yours truly. Okay, so then that brings us to UBCM, which is coming up. Difference that I'll share there is that FCM is sort of 3 days, UBCM is 4.5 days long. So starting Monday, which is a lot of workshops and study tours are traditionally on the Monday. Tuesday, it breaks into community size, which is always interesting. So you have small, mid-size, and big city. We fall into the mid-size category because we're in the population of over 5,000, between 5,000 and 30,000 or 40,000, I think, which is quite a large chunk. There's always an association of Vancouver Island Coastal Communities Forum. So then we're just with our coastal communities. Everyone breaks into their area associations. So then we're with our area as opposed to BC Midsize, which is all over, and then sort of back to all the delegates. So different perspectives in each, because midsize here could be entirely different in the Caribou and other areas of across BC, so it's quite interesting. The minister meetings are also held throughout the week. There's cabinet panels, so the provincial government will be allocated time. We don't know what their content is, but different ministers, there's usually between 2 or 4 town halls where they might have a panel of 3 or 5 different ministers presenting together, so then we would sort of choose which one we go to. They would have a topic on something. You would go and you might see the Minister of Environment with Minister of Agriculture all speaking in depending on the sections there. And then there's always addresses from the Leader of the Opposition, the Green Party, and from our Premier as well, and different workshops that you would sign up for. I always find the most interesting ones are the ones in the morning. I think they start at 7 in the morning or yeah. It's the early morning ones, and they're about 45 minutes long. And there's always like 5 on at a time that you could choose from and go to, but they're very early before the day starts at 8:30. And then the resolution package, it's like I said, it's about an inch thick. It's 200 and some. So the resolution committee tries to group like ones together in a block, ones that have been previous. There's all the notes. It may have been debated before and failed, but the sponsor can still bring it forward. Anything that doesn't get covered at convention automatically goes back to the UBCM executive, who then sections it off into the committees, and then the committees look to resolve, or if they need clarity, they'll send it back to the sponsoring organization. So they all get dealt with in some way if they run out of time on the floor, because that happens. The timelines are very precise because we have other speakers lined up. Peter Mansbridge is the keynote speaker this year, so he'll be speaking, and it just right at the outset after the opening to just sort of give the context. Resiliency and change is the theme, and to kind of hear all the keynotes have always been quite lively. But there's also a lot going on. The trade show is completely sold out with a wait list. It's bigger than the one at FCM. So again, it's the case, in this case, it's all relevant to BC. So I find that interesting because sometimes there's items that are only available in the Maritimes. It's interesting, but it's not relevant, whereas here it's all across BC. So it's very interesting. There's different receptions that happen throughout the evening. Of course, those are optional. There's also ones that are in the program, and then there's a lot that are outside the program. So Columbia Institute, the IFF, you'll start getting invites from probably maybe not Trans Mountain this year, but Trans Mountain and Enbridge and Kinder Morgan, and they've all been there, and there's just a lot that you'll start to get information from. There has been some media about the Chinese consulate reception and why is the UBCM having this. It's been 10 years. China is our second largest trading partner. For some communities, they want the ability to talk to someone. They have investment in their community, and this is a mechanism to do that. They're completely optional. Some disagree. Again, it's your choice. It's 2 hours over the dinner hour if you want to go or not go. Like all the other pieces. But of course, all the town halls are very informative. At UBCM, this is often when new grants are being launched, new opportunities are being launched, and that's all happening. In terms of UBCM, I'll just segue a bit because I just had an executive meeting. The Minister Darcy and the mental health strategy was released in June, so that file has now come out. That ministry was formed, and the strategy was to be released last year, but I think just given the size and the scope, it took a bit longer to come out. So that's come out as well. And then my committee hosted Minister Simpson, and he's doing a lot of work on accessibility and inclusion within communities. So he's out and will be doing a lot of public consultation through the fall in terms of then setting up legislation, and local government will be at the table in terms of how do new builds happen, that there isn't just, say, 10 units that are accessible. It's the case of how can all units be universal so that anyone can adapt and live and not have to wait for the 10 units, but actually every unit would be available. And looking at language, diversibility versus disability, what is it that works? And then how can we build out communities to make them self and inclusive for all letters? Like one comment that came up is someone with, say, who cannot see, that is blind. Well, there's Braille. Well, how would you know that? What would take you there if you don't know that it exists? So there has to be something so that you know what to look for. Otherwise, it doesn't help you if you're not aware that this is there. We've done some pieces also with our hearing loop here, and I think there's much more we can do in terms of, this might answer our sidewalk question. What is the best surfacing for, and what would be a good standard?
On your behalf.
To choose from, for durability, to prevent slips, like all these sorts of things. So then his plan is to actually introduce legislation next year in 2020. So all the consultation will take place now. The Lieutenant Governor also attended the meeting and talked a bit about her priorities. And one of them is she gave a real, kind remark to local government. And just how with social media and the like, it's not a respectful exchange. And so she wants to look at, let's keep democracy alive, and how can it be respectful? How can we encourage more people to get involved and not be put off by what's happening there? And then Minister Robinson always attends, and we review our files with her and what is the status on that. So again, I'm always given the cannabis file, so the focus there is looking for the revenue share. So the province right now has asked us to produce information on our costs. However, when the federal government made the commitment, they didn't ask the province to prove their costs before they did the flow through. So we understand that the province has costs, but so do we. So we need to define and make that happen. So that was all quite interesting as well. So it's a marathon at UBCM. Like I said, early mornings, I think, is it 7? I think it's 7 they start. So breakfast before then, like it's early. And then, it can go really late. So when I was younger, I was there at 7, and I was probably up until 2 in the morning, and I was right back at 7 again. So it's a case of, okay, you need to just pace yourself a little bit, and you'll get the program in due course, which is quite exciting. I will share, though, that between FCM, after UBCM, I had the opportunity to attend Women Deliver in Vancouver. So I went from Quebec to Vancouver. That conference had 8,000 delegates. 8% were from Canada, and everyone else was from across the globe. Everything was webcast. At one time, there was over 250,000 people watching the webcast, and I can't remember his name. My husband was like, do you know who that is? He's like the head of the United Nations, and he was speaking to the delegates webcast. Intense security, so I had to wait in line for 2 hours to get into the opening session. But I met some people in line, and women from all over, and very insightful in terms of concerns in other countries about climate change, increase in temperature, what will that do about the spread of tropical diseases, and how will that what impacts will that have in those particular communities. Talked a lot about even refugees when they're moving and families. There's still always the case of the monies that they're given is often something that is through an app on a phone, but they'll give the phone automatically to the male, whereas the woman has always been in charge of the money and the food in that household. And sometimes they're separated. So he's never had to look after food and money, but they automatically give it to the male and not to the female. So that conversation is starting to change. So really interesting in terms of what our Canadians are doing abroad. It was quite fascinating, and it's held every 3 years, so it was good to be, but it was quite intense with the number of people there, and I caught up with the international delegates while I was there as well, which was really good. So big conference experience for that. So more to come. But you'll start to get the program details, and you might want to leaf through the resolutions in advance. In that case, it's you're a member there, so you vote on your own. Like, it's not, what would my council do? This is where it comes down to the membership. We are all individual members that are attending, and then once we know if we're receiving the minister meeting with Minister Popham, we would just want to have some people in the resolution session and some people out meeting with the minister. So we'll just see what the timing there is like. I'll have some duties to do there, and there is a Towards Parity initiative. There's a new workshop and reception on Monday for women that are looking to find mentors and to get other supports through local government. It's not open to just women, it's open to men as well, but that's sort of a new addition, and there will be a session for... You could be someone's mentor, Al. You probably are in your world of lions. I'm sure you've mentored many women in your time, and you just don't realize it. But there's a lot happening, so it'll be good. In terms of other updates, the important piece is that we put resolutions forward to both the Juan de Fuca Water Distribution and the CRD Water Commission. So I understand from Councillor Logan's that they agreed to support it, but not the funding.
I can read it out right now.
Okay.
Yes, so the motion that was passed at the Juan de Fuca Water Distribution Commission was that the Juan de Fuca Water Distribution Commission support in principle the extension of water infrastructure to North Souk in conjunction with Highway 14 construction activity at no cost to the Juan de Fuca service with respect to initial capital costs, and direct staff to report back to the Commission when a definitive plan is advanced by the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. So a lot of work has to be done from the ministry to provide additional information on the details of what it means to bring water to that region before that could move forward. But that was the motion that will, I assume, be passed to the CRD, who will await the presentation.
In this case, like, the commission has its own delegated authority, so it's separate from the board. So this would not flow through to the board. It goes to the Water Commission. And that's Councillor St. Pierre is on the Water Commission.
Yes, sorry, that's
So,
what I meant, yeah.
Yeah, has there been any,
No, as a matter of fact, I found out that there's nothing on the agenda for tomorrow, so tomorrow's meeting's been canceled.
The minutes from this meeting haven't even gone out yet.
Okay,
So it won't be until the fall. And I did let the representative from the North Suk group know that it wouldn't be until,
okay,
like, don't wait around until September, October or such when, because like the minutes probably won't even be available until then.
the minutes,
anyhow,
yeah, the
from
minutes
this.
would have to be
So it
adopted by
will.
the next meeting.
But in the meantime, the CRD is very aware, and they are working with the ministry to get those answers, so it's not that it's stopped here.
Okay.
It's just summer and reports.
But that's happening, though, at least the CRD distribution staff are connecting with the ministry staff.
Yes, and
Okay.
the CRD staff were at the Wanda Fuca meeting, so they heard the deliberation.
Okay.
They understand all the details that I brought up at that meeting, and the intent of the council's wishes in our motion. So they're aware of that. We made that very clear, and then they're working with the ministry to provide those answers. So it will be on us, I believe, as a district to still pressure to get the answers that we want, especially after the meeting that a few of us attended with the North Sioux group and the ministry. There wasn't enough time in that meeting. It probably could have gone another 2 hours.
Right.
Because the ministry presented a lot of information very quickly, and there were a lot of questions that couldn't be answered, but a lot that were. So, yeah, we'll definitely still have to do a lot of work to make sure this continues to get the answers that we need.
So at this point, like, is there any follow-up with the Minister of Transportation that we need to do?
I don't believe so, as long as we continue to get the information back that we request. So at this point, we're looking for dollar figures to figure out what the cost would be to the residents of that area if they were to hook up, if that was the direction that the ministry and the CRD were to take.
Okay. Councillor McMouth? Thank you for that.
So it's about 4 million for the water line. And because of sort of like the incline and the distance it has to go, we also need a pump station.
Right.
Which is $2 million. So roughly the total cost is 6 million. What MOTI has to calculate is if they are not having to drill new wells, then that's a deduction in cost for them. And it's sort of the minutia of if people wish to have, one piece would be substituting the piped-in water for the wells. And then the second piece is people that their wells aren't affected, but perhaps they wish to have water. It may be a buy-in. And what the cost looks like per property will be different every time, of course, because the length of pipe that has to go up. If their house is right at the front of the line, if their house is way back at the property, things like that.
Right, of course, the distance from where the line is to their home. Right.
Exactly. And then the other piece was what is the word I'm looking for? What's the fire?
It's a
The
It's like a
hydrants is one
fire
piece, but
fill- it's for our pumper truck they were talking about, yeah.
yeah, they have like
It's a fill station.
Yeah, I think their insurance is cheaper if there's piped water.
100%, yeah, but
Big difference.
No, they were looking at like a station where our fire truck would pull up and then be able to refill, like, because
basically
it's a
giant
tanker
tank of
truck.
stagnant water to refill the pump truck.
Yeah, and then they would keep a cistern, that's
Thank
right,
you.
so that when they're tending fires, that they could go, and once the truck is empty, they would go back to that station, refill it, and do that. It's like a fill
So
station.
that's like another cost difference too, because instead of them replacing it, they wouldn't need to have that anymore if they had the
That's
plumbed-in
right.
water. Yeah.
Okay. But it sounds that I just want to make sure that everyone who needs to be working on this is, so mainly Ministry of Transportation, and then also that the CRD staff are involved in it.
And is there any more work that we can do as like an advocacy piece to the province for this money?
I think we need to, now part of me is like, okay, let's send a letter right now. You know, we could just say in that as that resolution, like this resolution has been we brought this forward, this is the outcome, so that there's a file note that we sent that out, and this is sort of our understanding of what we expect. Or it's the case of we wait till that report comes, and then is there anything missing or what? I mean, the ministry is pretty you know, they're in touch right now because of this major highway project. It's just the case that when it started, it was like, no, go to the CRD for water. We're here to do the highway. So we are doing that. And of course, like in terms of advocacy, well, I'm not funding it, I'm not funding it. And then it sort of comes back and it's like, okay, then we push again and say, okay, this is where you've told us to go to their CRD. We've done that. We've exhausted that possibility. Here's what they've come back with. So here, we want you to fund this.
I would like to push now
Yeah.
because the timelines are so tight.
That's the
with
thing.
With the date when they want to get started on this project is not that far away. And so the money needs to be teed up before then, because for me personally, it doesn't make sense to redo this whole stretch and then not put the water in now.
Well,
because-
now's the timing.
Exactly, because there's
Yeah.
that whole 14-kilometer stretch from where the new co-op is on the double lanes all the way out to the 5100 area that has no piped-in water. And wells, they're not replenishing, they're continually being lower and lower. That's one piece. It's also the safety component with the fire. There's so many, it doesn't make sense to dig up that entire stretch and not put the water in now. So it's not a matter of if, it's just how. So if we push now, that's what makes sense to me.
It would be timely to send a letter, Councillor Logans.
And I think that's one thing that the motion was missing, fair enough, because we hadn't had those more in-depth discussions with the ministry and the North Sioux group at that time that the motion went through. But to include more whereas type information to state all the facts that Councillor McMath was mentioning. Now, I did bring that up, all of those points up at the Juan de Fuca meeting. However, the note-taking computer was not working, and there was a recording, like an audio recording of our meeting. So you just never know what is actually taken in. But also to have that in writing, like those specific points that create that dollar figure that Councillor McMath was bringing up, I think it would be really important to do in advance of receiving a report from the ministry, because those points will be overlooked if we go back to them after and say, oh, you know what, you didn't look at this, can you look at it now? They'll say, no, we don't have the time and resources to do it, it's been done. So I think it's important to make sure we ask for that in writing. Like, we have technically, the CRD is aware that those are the items that we want to take into account financially, but it would be really beneficial for us to directly advise the ministry of those specific items. And also the environmental concerns about having a well feeding a cistern for our fire.
No. Councillor Beddoes?
Do we need a motion to?
Yes, so I think in
I'll
this-
make that motion.
Yeah, that council directs staff to draft a letter
I'm trying to help you out.
the MOTI regarding the outcome of the CRD's JDF water distribution meeting. That direct staff to draft a letter to the MOTI. And then we can sort of pull in what we've learned from.
Yeah, that was very good, what Councillor McMath said.
From those meetings. Councillor St. Pierre?
I just have a further question about, once you've got the trench open, you're putting in a pipe. Let's say that, they start moving ahead with this pipe. Are there any other pipes that would make sense to put in? I know that, if you're putting in either broadband, fiber optics, electrical, whatever. I mean, when you've got that trench, that's the time to put in the pipe. That's when it's cheap to do so. Is there anybody that might want to piggyback on, having this and reduce costs that way? Well, that's just it. Yeah, I'm curious. Can we get BC Hydro in on this and potentially defray some of the costs that way? I don't know, just curious about that. Because it's super easy to put it in when the trench is open.
No. Well, it's true, but let's just deal with this one resolution first, that director of the MOTI and infrastructure.
I withdraw my motion, let Councillor McMath make it.
Regarding, it's kind of a draft a letter to them regarding the resolution passed, or resolution passed? Carried by the JDF Water Board
It's a matter of urgency too, because of the timeline, so I would like the word urgency.
Water, it's the JDF Water Distribution Commission? Yeah. Councillor St. Pierre?
Friendly amendment would replace regarding with supporting, perhaps?
Yeah, let's just get it up there and, because she's still. Draft a letter to the MO regarding the resolution from the JDF Water Board meeting on,
July 2nd.
okay, it's a commission, not a board. From the July 2nd meeting. I would say draft a letter to update the Ministry of Transportation, just so that this is where we're at, and here's what was carried. Thoughts?
Well, I could put, like there was somewhere an urgency and it's a high matter of importance to the district of Souk. I mean, it's pretty high on
Yeah.
their agenda, is it not? Well, let's state that.
It is, and so that's where, like, we could put that into the letter.
Yeah, for sure.
Recommend Council Direct Staff to draft a letter to update the Ministry of MOTR from the JDF and request a response and request a, like, here's the resolution and here's what we've learned on costs. Are you funding it? I don't know. Just like Councillor Logan's.
I think with the amount of consultation and relationship building that the ministry is doing in this project, it wouldn't be, I think it wouldn't be a big ask to have them present to us in some form. Whether that's the whole project where they're at and include the piece specific to the water extension or whatnot, we should have some sort of face-to-face.
Updated response.
Yeah, and requesting a status update from their end, like a response.
We want a financial. We
Yeah,
want
we're on-
an answer about a financial question
Yeah,
specifically.
I'm just trying to think of.
The
how
rest
to
of it
word
will come,
Yeah,
but specifically, we need an answer to the financial question of pulling water.
I would like to have somebody actually here to talk to, too, rather than a letter back.
and that and be invited to present on the project and update council on the status of this request. Mr. McInnes?
Just for my clarity and trying to formulate some relationships going forward with various departmental staff, commission staff, my understanding is the highway project is a transportation project. Is the ask going to be that transportation take responsibility for the water portion as well? Or
Yes.
is that going to be managed by CRD or the commission?
Well, the province initially said ask the CRD to deal with the water, so we're doing that. And the CRD has said we support the extension, but we're not going to fund it. So then that just pushes us back to the province. So we went there and they support it, but they're not, the JDF commission isn't going to fund it.
So the JDF commission is not going to fund it, and I don't think that was ever our intention. But it's still, that doesn't mean the CRD supports it. So
Yeah.
that's where it would go to the CRD Water Board. And that's where I'm a bit unclear as to whether this motion is being pushed to the CRD Water Board. But what I believe is happening is that the CRD staff are aware of the issue and the details. The ministry is aware of the issue and the details. The ministry is providing the CRD, from my understanding, with the financial details. So the CRD is waiting for a report from the ministry. Where we fit into this, I don't know, but the CRD, I don't know if their intent is to report back to us or not.
They won't
And
because
they- yeah.
they're their own, they have delegated authority, so it's only our representative that will then get that answer, which is Councillor St. Pierre in this case, and then share it back with us. But even when we looked at the sustainability strategy, there was no appetite at that time to extend any more water out this way. And even though we have areas that are going dry, there was just no appetite, and then we pushed, and that's where we came to a mediated outcome on it, but still there's no appetite to fund anymore. And then I hear how, well, they've already funded the water line when that had to be upgraded out to this community, and all those other communities shouldered this, and now we have all this growth out here. But the board dynamic has changed since then, so I'm not sure entirely.
The other piece, sorry, I just forgot, was that I believe, and the others who attended the meeting can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that it was stated there that the hookup would be the responsibility of the residents.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
usually the
Yeah,
case.
Yeah. And so that was one of the things that the JDF wanted to make sure as well, that they weren't responsible for that, of course.
Yeah, it's more like they put in the main, and then residents connect to the main. It's, but in this case, like if my property, if I was losing my well, and this is where it's a little bit different, like if the ministry's putting in a new road and it's impacting property and their wells are being removed, so then they said, okay, we will make good or slightly better than what you have. So then that's where they have to find water for those residents in other areas. So, and that's a bit of an unknown as to whether or not they'll be successful drilling in other areas. It's hard to say. And then if not, then that's the case of, okay, well, now's the time to put in water, because you may or may not have success hitting water if it's in a different spot. You may take up the only spot right now where there is a good source of water, and you could drill everywhere else and not hit it. That's the unknown. We don't know yet. Councillor McMath?
Yeah, it's that if your well is being disturbed or impacted or completely removed, it's that, in theory, you would not pay for the hookup.
No.
And that they would take care of it because that would be a substitution for it. And then if your well was not impacted but you wish to be connected, that you would front that fee. It's kind of, I don't know that the CRD is completely off the hook as far as funding goes. It's just that I'm just getting the sense that we are the people lighting the fire, where it's like, this has to happen.
Yeah.
Because both groups are kind of sitting back and waiting for each other, and then nothing will happen, but the project will continue.
Yes.
And the road will be paved, and then nothing will happen. And so I think we just got to push back to both groups. And then we
Yeah.
are waiting for the minutia, and there are lots of details that MOTI still, like, as far as what the exact layout of that road looks like, they still don't know. So it will be a little tricky for specifics on the numbers, but we'll still get a general idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. There's the two pieces, those that are losing it and those, okay, now there is water. You have an opportunity to hook up now.
Yeah.
And so there is that. And that's where they said that they will make good for that was the concern from residents, is that they would lose their water. Councillor St. Pierre.
Just wondering if we should be bringing this up directly to the CRD. I mean, I know that staff is involved already and that staff will be in touch with the Ministry of Transportation, but I also understand that there's a certain amount of influence in simply bringing it up as a part of the agenda and making sure that it's on the agenda and discussed by the commission itself or by the board itself.
Well, we put a notice of motion through to the commission already.
So that's already in place.
That's already done.
Yeah, so when you have your meeting, like, it was canceled, right? So I think it's just following up. Maybe our staff can just double check with the CRD Water Commission staff. Okay, you got the notice of motion, the meeting was canceled, didn't see it. So it has to be on the September agenda.
I mean, if we're in a rush here, and we are,
Is that a third motion?
It's a follow-up, like, the meeting should have, it should have, there should have been a meeting tomorrow, and this would have been the business on
on the agenda
it.
for tomorrow, but
Well-
should this topic not have been there, so then there should have been a meeting? So who follows up with the group then?
that's what I'm asking here.
Well, this is where it's a request from, like, our staff to contact CRD staff. Hey, we passed this and sent this to you, but the meeting was canceled and we didn't see it. So is it for sure on your September agenda? Because we sent that letter and that request a couple months ago.
Not just is it on September, but why isn't it happening now?
We sent it to both though, so it should have hit both at the same time. So was that the chair that canceled? I don't know,
Yeah.
right? So it's just, I don't want a September meeting to come and go with this not on that agenda. It has to be there. So that's just a request that our staff follow up and say, hey, the meeting was canceled, it wasn't on there, what's going on? What is that? Because we sent it to both. Councillor Logans?
Does that have to be staff that follows up, or can it be Councillor St. Pierre that just asks the person who does the minutes?
I would do both. It would be the case where our staff would contact staff and Councillor St. Pierre would contact the chair of the committee. So it's politician to local, and just contact Councillor Merceno and hey, this was canceled, but we have an important piece of business. Do you have it set for September? And so I think both need to happen. Usually it's the case of both. So does that need to be, or is that housekeeping that our staff will follow up? Does that actually have to be in the resolution?
I think we can follow up. It's been difficult trying to follow the bouncing ball in these three entities.
Yes.
So the bottom line, what I'm hearing is if there is no external money, this thing is dead in the water. Or are there financial models that the capital cost can be amortized and recouped or partly recouped through utility charges?
And that I don't know.
That's the water commission that determines.
Yeah, it's like all the
Yeah.
water is controlled by the CRD, so,
So what I heard from Councillor Logans is that analysis is being done right now.
yeah.
And the advocacy piece is just to make sure it keeps moving ahead. But the technical piece of it is either CRD, the Water Commission, or the Juan de Fuca Distribution Commission.
Or the province. Right, I think at the end it would be the province. They're putting, this is their infrastructure, their highway they're putting in that's causing this impact.
So it possibly could be a part of the highway expansion project.
Yeah.
But they've already said they're not bringing money to the table for the water portion.
No, and that's where they said, talk to the CRD about it, and then that's where we're at right now. But we just want to keep this live because it's not a for them, they're it's a priority to us as an impacted community, but not really to anyone else. Right? So there's
I
a
guess
fire.
the argument that we were trying to nail down is, because it's my impression that the province has this $4 million figure sort of in their heads. No. The $4 million figure in their heads that, okay, we can eat this. The $6 million figure, I don't believe they feel they want to eat, because that's an extra $2 million for the pump station and I get the impression that is not something they at all want to fund. So our question then is, okay, you have this idea, the original plan from the ministry that will cost $6 million, less all of our points of pulling the water through and what would it actually cost to do this, this, and this. Will that number actually be the same? Or will it be bigger? If it's bigger, I get it. Maybe you won't fund it. But it could be less, it could be the same. In that case, that's why we really want to nail down the nitty-gritty of the financial discussion to determine if it will be closer to 4 million or 6 million or what. Because right now we're just hearing it could be 4 million and we're okay with that. It could be 6, we're not okay with that. But we need those details. Does that make sense?
Councillor Bateman?
Yeah, I've just got in front of me here Colonel Boucher's report. He gives very comprehensive reports here, and he does have under water supply Modi's Mike Pearson, who's the director of Vancouver Island District Manager, and Project Manager Darren England are to meet with other bodies and local officials to explore water supply options. So according to this there is an obligation for Modi to reach out. I was also thinking that given that the ministerial deadline for these UBCM meetings is this coming Wednesday, it might be an opportunity for Councillor McMath, who is our Moti representative, as well as Councillor Logans and St. Pierre, to sit down with the minister, or at least request a meeting. That is July 17th, and then there's also the staff meetings deadline of August 23rd for UBCM meetings. So with Ministry of Transportation staff, there's an opportunity there to do further lobbying in addition to this letter.
So it's my understanding that the only ministerial meeting that we've requested at UBCM so far is with agriculture.
Yes, that's correct. So in terms of adding this one, we can, I recommend with this one that we request a meeting outside of UBCM, because there's only 20 minutes at UBCM. We'll get half an hour, 40 minutes outside of UBCM. And it's like speed dating for the minister. It's one community right after the other, right? So they're like, okay, who's next? Like, this is really specific, and that's where the second part is. I don't know that do we want to request that meeting or not, given that this is all happening and we need more information. So, I'd rather, once we get, have that meeting, staff sort of do this, and then the CRD says, we're not funding any of that. Then we're like, okay, now we have this report, it's 5.2 million, and we take it to the minister and say, look, we have done as you asked, we reached out, here's the data, we need you to fund this, because right now we don't know, we're gonna go to the minister and say, okay, everyone's working on this, so still important to us. I just think we need a bit more of a, what are we pushing for when we go to the minister? What is the problem we're trying to solve? And right now, we would get, well, our staff is talking to the CRD staff and your staff, which is what we want. I just don't know that something is going to shake out in time to meet. And then when we put in our request, we don't have that information yet. But we can also make a request that once we get that we push for that meeting. And that's one thing we can reach out to our MLA for and say, we need to have this meeting now. This is really important. And I've had success in accessing the ministers when it matters on that. So, Minister Beddoes, Councillor Beddoes.
Promoted. I'd like to move ahead with this motion and at least get something going. I mean, they're all great ideas and we're all thinking in the right direction, but I think that's the step that we have to take soon.
That's been moved. There's no seconder required in committee of the whole. So are there any questions? All good? So we'll work on that. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried unanimously. So that's the one advocacy piece. We submitted our request for the Minister of Agriculture, so we'll get confirmation on that in the next months or so. And then in terms of health, I'll share that the postings for physicians are out now. So part of it was the clinic expansion was contingent on the Evergreen Mall doing their expansion. So that's obviously, we've seen how they are rolling ahead now. From what I've heard, there was kind of a good response to the posting so far, but the posting will remain up by Island Health until it's been filled. So it's sort of internal because we're always going to need doctors. There has been a lot of expression of physicians wanting to choose Souk specifically, so that's really good for us. And I think a lot of that is because of the care model that our local physician group has put together. There was an article in the Times Colonist recently about that. And that team-based care and the development of a patient home is very important, and that's what's attracting physicians there. At the same time, there is the dialogue starting. Okay, the physician or the clinical expansion was a step. It's not the be-all, end-all for community care, and it's the case of having a community care facility located within Souk. So that dialogue is starting to emerge with Island Health, our local physician group, and many other health stakeholders in the community, so I think that's positive. And some of it was the Lot A work and having that report final in terms of how we use that potential property. So it's an option. Other updates from members of council? Councillor Beddoes?
Just let you know that the Sea Park expansion is going along very well. The last meeting, we were very pleasantly surprised that we're able to put back in some items that we had to cut to come in on budget to get it even on the go. It was just a matter of a $25,000 bench structure, but it was still a step in the right direction. There are another couple of initiatives going on at Sea Park, but I'll report on those in September. But it's moving along very, very well. So that's it.
And the pool is open again.
Yep.
It had its annual closure and it's open.
Yeah, I'm just really blown away about how well that organization is run down there. Top notch, and the commission, although we do have some interesting arguments, but they're good constructive arguments, so like we do here. Not always agreeing, but we do move ahead. It takes a bit of time, but we get there. It's good stuff.
Councillor St. Pierre?
In terms of the Water Commission, I was just wondering if there needed to be a change in terms of, I guess, my status as an alternate. And if we had already addressed that in some way, or is that automatic in some?
We will need to do, I think that's next meeting.
Through your worship, I thought we were going to leave those ones in place and just as temporaries and then reevaluate after the by-election.
Yep. Yeah, so that'll just remain, and then I think we'll reevaluate that and, yeah, and pick it and reshift as, yeah. Okay. Yep, no, that's good. Any other updates?
We did have the first meeting of the Climate Action Change Committee, or the Climate Change Action Committee. Went very well. We had nearly full attendance, 2 staff on hand, Patty Rear and Laura Hooper provided excellent support. We have a fully charged agenda for tomorrow, and everyone's invited, from the public, I should say. I know we had a good glance downstairs at the agenda, so, just letting you all know. And that'll be happening tomorrow at 5:30. That's the regular time for the Climate Change Action Committee, is 5:30 on Tuesdays. Once a month, obviously, second Tuesday. Is it second Tuesday? Third Tuesday. Oh, my God.
Okay, check the website.
Yeah, check the website.
Other updates? So, Councillor Bateman?
Okay, so I have a lot of updates here, but I'll try to keep it short. So there is Lot A, the Northeast Quadrant Task Force. We had our first meeting last week, and we're off to a good start. The outcome from that meeting was a desire to get into a borrowing referendum to ride on the coattails of the by-election, since that will be costing us, I think, $20,000, and it would be useful to potentially add a question. However, it was quickly made clear to us that there are far too many legislated steps to do this in short order. So we're off to a good start. Representatives from the Souk Lions, Souk Age Friendly Committee, Souk Seniors, and the Souk Wanda Fuca Health Foundation are all part of this, and Ivy Campbell and our Jennifer here were invaluable, and we'll be meeting again July 23rd with a mission of getting some business cases to council by either September 9th or the end of September for us all to have a discussion around. Also, the library is moving forward slowly but surely. A lease agreement is a disposition of land notice is being prepared at this moment. And then we will, once that's settled, we'll get a development permit will come to council. And this has been a long time coming, of course, and I just want to again reiterate that there was talk of shovels in the ground maybe in 2017, and then it was the spring of 2018, And now perhaps the sign out there on Lot A says 2018, generally speaking. We'll see if that happens. But the key point here is that Vancouver Island Regional Library Board has been working with our staff, and our staff have been holding Viral to the letter of our OCP, of our the pushback's been around issues around sewer serviceability, water and drainage management plans, a privacy fence, to ensure that our town center plan and guidelines are being respected, building design issues, energy conservation, even down to safety and security with this CPTED program, Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design. So, as Viral has acknowledged, SUC is asking a lot of us, and we've not been pushed like this before by other municipalities and regional districts. So, SUC standing up and acting like a mature municipality and ensuring that this iconic library that Viral has created for us and wants to create a signature library on Vancouver Island and within their system will in fact evolve as we hope it will. And of course it's a very expensive project. They've assigned $6 million and another $1 million from their reserve fund. They also want a 10% contingency fund, so that brings it down to $6.3 million. The cost of South Island construction has been rising. I think it's 10% up this year. However, there apparently is a decline in the building market, so perhaps those costs will come down. So all is as it is and will be. So that's the library, and what else? We have, there was the Heartland landfill tour on July 5th, was pretty fascinating. Again, I think we're ahead of Quebec City in some ways here we have apparently the cleanest leachate in Canada, leachate being water that has touched waste. This is it's not a landfill per se, it's what was the word they used? An engineered landfill. Its capacity will be maxed out by 2100. The key here is in the burning of garbage. It's being utilized currently as electricity. They're capturing electricity and feeding it into the BC Hydro line and servicing something like 2,200 homes, I think was the number I heard. And then the question at the CRD level is, do we continue that project or do we invest in a renewable natural gas system that will take that energy and shift it into the Fortis line? And then there's the question around a compost facility on site. So are we going to burn our food scraps? Because currently being shipped to Cache Creek, BC, at considerable expense. Or will we compost it and create, soil remediation? A number of CRD directors are very keen on that idea of composting versus burning it for renewable natural gas. I may have got all that wrong, but it's, again, the learning curve is, Then there's a number of other things happened. There was an EDGE meeting, the Economic Development Group, which Councillor McMath and I attended, and I think one of the key messages coming out of it was the idea of commercial industrial land within the Souk area. And in summary, as Mr. Wittich, the note taker from this meeting states, in summary, it was the consensus of the group that commercial industrial land is important for the community and has not been lost in the planning of this community, because in many communities, housing is going on to land that ideally would be reserved for industrial commercial. And as Mr. Wittich says, there is such a connection here with the tax base, employment, the environment, getting people out of their cars and working locally. So that's a really remarkably good group. I'm quite delighted to be part of that. And there were a number of other things, but maybe I should stop here.
Question, Councillor Beddoes?
Yeah, there was something said there that kind of threw a few alarm bells in me. For your task force, you're talking about a borrowing referendum. Have you decided on a model already?
No. We're not there yet. That's not happening.
Okay, well, just that word came up, so that's why I'm asking the question, because it spooked a few people, I can tell you that right now.
It spooked a few people. Okay, well, it came up towards the end of our task force meeting, and the point is that the community of Souk back in 2014 in the plebiscite, 82% of Souk residents stated that they were keen for the creation of a community center, youth senior center. So I think it was felt that a possible borrowing referendum to get the money together to up to a maximum of $5 million was, I think, the terminology. But we didn't get too far along this path until reality check came in, and that was that. So I think it's one of those directions. It's one of those potential business cases. Will the district and the taxpayers come together to help build this thing, or do we follow the model of tapping into the funds we've already committed? The Lions have some funding. The seniors have funding. There is Al Jones and that group feel that they can raise funds through the community. There's Macola Housing or a housing society to run the 3 stories of affordable rental co-housing is the model there. So there's a whole bunch of ways, and this, I suppose, came up, I'm not sure who of us recommended it, and it came up because of this by-election and the sense of, okay, here's an opportunity, why don't we throw this in to the mix? And I think there's no need for concern. It's not happening.
I think
it's just ideas.
I wasn't at the meeting, but I think it was just the case. But there's a whole process to do a referendum. Like, there's a process that we need to go through, and we as a council need to receive a report. Like, we gave the task force timing over the summer to come up with something and options that we would look into in September. So, and then it's the case of where are we at. So they have work to do before it comes to us, before we make that decision, and we can't meet that.
Yeah, I have all the faith in Councillor Bateman. Believe me, probably no better person to lead it. It's just that when I hear those words, boring referendum and 3 stories, and I mean, that was sort of one idea that was pitched, but there's other ideas. And I just wanted to make sure that we, are looking at all the options. And I think that's your tasking, isn't it, to come back with a number of options. Okay, I'm happy with that. Thank you very much for that explanation.
All right.
Ms. Machado?
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to clarify that we didn't really get to finish our conversation on the topic, but a referendum is not actually required for a borrowing bylaw. There's call it new, but it's old now, the alternative approval process, which can be conducted at a significantly less cost and a whole lot less staff time required to execute that. So if and when the council is ready to proceed with that, there are cheaper alternatives for doing that. We don't need to have a referendum.
Yeah, so there's options, and we're just not there yet. It's early. Councillor St. Pierre?
Just wanted to provide a clarification on something that came up a little bit earlier with the Heartland landfill and waste management. One of the options that's being promoted right now is pyrolysis, which is essentially what Councillor Beddoes was describing in Quebec City, is burning all the waste. There are many people that have concerns over that because part of the waste they want to burn are compostables that we might actually need to retain fertility in the South Island to actually produce food. And that we're locked in at that point to producing certain amounts of waste, actually increasing our waste potentially to produce more power. And also that the project, I think, was about 5 times as expensive as composting facilities. So there are significant questions around those things. And then the other question was around what to do with the captured methane that's already being produced, whether to burn it or to put it in the forest line. Burn it, produce electricity, or simply redirected into the Fortis infrastructure. So hope that clarifies some things.
Yeah, there's a good infographic that I can find and I'll send out. So in terms of what you're saying is right now, the CRD harvests methane out of the landfill, and some of it is fed into the hydro line and the rest of it is flared. So when you're standing there, like, it's hot, you can feel it. It's probably, the structure is probably where Ms. Royer Collard is sitting, and you can feel the heat off of it. So it's the case of, like, that's wasted energy. And so the case here then is that you could actually put in a system there that would take all of it and then turn it into renewable natural and feed it into the Fortis line. So that work now is being looked at by the board, and it'll come back for a decision on which avenue do we want to go, as well as the composting, because it's going to Cache Creek, and then there has been a preference by the board to actually have something on site as opposed to driving it all over the place. So those dialogues are coming. In terms of the CRD, there's follow-up motion that you wanted to make, or notice of motion regarding the enforcement or the, I don't know, with dogs and how our residents are sort of being, I don't know, I think targeted maybe in a way, it seems.
Well, yeah, to follow up on Mr. Whittett's presentation, and also I forget her name, last week. Yeah, Ms. Dominguez. Yeah, and, you know, last year, the CRD put through its new off-leash policy and on-leash policy, and we did raise a ruckus, and the chair of the Parks and Environment Committee of that time, last September, stated that the CRD would investigate our concerns and get back to us by this summer, and has yet to happen. So I think the notice of motion will be to again reiterate and ask for a re-examination of its current policy with respect to the fact that Souk is being unduly penalized, it seems.
Yeah, so. Okay, so just to encourage, you know, like, if you want to draft something, then we can draft that together for that
Yes.
Environment Committee in September, and the notice of motion process has shifted a bit at the CRD board. It's more
Yes.
like ours. The other one that I just want to bounce off of members of council that I also feel should go is little interesting, and it's in regards to our museum. So as you know, the Souk Region Museum is physically located in our community, and I need to find out approximately how much of it is funded by Souk residents. So we fund it as well as the Juan de Fuca funds the museum together. However, that then flows through to the Electoral Area Directors Committee, and then they receive all of the reports and do the budget deliberations, and then it goes to the board where it's sort of rubber stamped. The problem I have from a governance perspective is, why is Pender and Salt Spring Island receiving information about our museum, and I'm not, and myself or a Souk director is not at the table, like, we're not on that committee. So because of the way it was structured many years ago, that seemed like a fit, but 20 years now, when we're funding the lion's share, I would say 70%, say, of the museum, there needs to be, that representation needs to change. So it's nothing against the electoral area directors, but Pender and Salt Spring and our Juan de Fuca are at that table, and we're not at that table. So that needs to change to me, because it just doesn't make sense. It's outdated now, so I'm going to draft something to the Finance and Governance Committee, and this is new. They've done something recently with the Royal McPherson Theatre Group. I don't remember all the logistical details, but something that more accurately reflects that. So I would just like to know for this motion is just roughly what percentage is funded by Souk, by the Souk tax base. I think that makes sense.
Mayor
Yes.
Lee Boyko has that information.
Okay,
So if the council wants to get hold of Lee, he has that all the time.
okay, so I can do that. This isn't really a direction to staff, because I kind of have something crafted, and that was just the piece. I'll reach out to him and plunk that in, but I think it's timely that that changes. And And then, so there was some discussion, we'll just have it go to the Finance and Governance Committee. And I said, okay, well, that's fine right now, while Suk has a representation on that committee, but we don't every year. So then why is OPE, Victoria Langford, or whoever else making decisions about our museum? It still doesn't make sense. It needs to reflect, it needs to be maybe a subgroup that is made up of both Suk and the Juan de Fuca specifically, and not include Pender and Salt Spring. I think that needs to change. So that'll come forward in September as well. Anything else from members of council? Any members of the public have questions or comments? Anything from staff? So these, okay. So then, okay, there's just a matter that, in terms of our community celebration that's happening on August the 17th, Councillor Beddoes is our liaison and is working with that. And the Avengers Endgame movie has been confirmed. It'll sort of kick off at dusk. So is this dusk? Not quite. Just about. So that just gives us, like, it'll get shorter and shorter. It is a long movie. You know, so in some ways, probably the earlier we start, the better, because you're right, but still very popular, and I understand that. And of course, admission is free, and the Lions will be working to have snacks. So more information will come, particularly the Sukmir is our partner. It will be pushing out a lot more. It was just, we have a lineup of things, and then of course the Fine Arts Show is coming up next, I think is our, and Community in Blooms is starting tomorrow. So it's just one after another. That'll come in it, yeah. Councillor Bateman.
Yeah. On another subject, this BC Supreme Court decision around the plastic bag, the City of Victoria's plastic bag ban, and the reason for repealing that City of Victoria bylaw was that the city did not seek permission from the Ministry of Environment for approval. So I'm wondering whether we need to recommend to council that we write a letter to the Ministry of Environment to formally seek approval of our checkout bag bylaw, number 734.
Is there any feedback from staff on that, to do that?
Yeah, at this time, as it has to have ministerial approval before it's had final. So I think we're in a position of just kind of wait and see right now. The City of Victoria has 3 options that they're considering, which is to appeal through the Supreme Court of Canada, or they're going to ask for legislation changes to require that ministerial approval at the provincial level, or they'll just come back with a new bylaw. So I think we're just, our bylaw is not in effect until 2020, and because of the court decision is unenforceable anyway. So, you know, we're just, it's just like we don't have a bylaw. And I think we're just going to wait and see which approach they're going to take before we take any action.
I suspect there'll be a late resolution coming to UBCM. The deadline came and went already, but that would be one that would fit that criteria. Councillor St. Pierre?
It also came up in some of the correspondence that the City of Victoria is also working with business people to actually promote the end result of the bylaw, regardless of whether or not it's enforceable, you know, based on this decision. So, and there's a lot of support for it within the business community, and so they're moving forward with it on that level as well. And that's certainly something that we can consider.
I think the province was caught by surprise too.
Well, and I did hear from the, I did hear an interview with the chair or the CEO of the Chamber of Commerce that they are, because it was businesses that pushed for it in the first place. So, and the council responded. It's just like our constituents raised it with us, and our businesses are already adopting this practice, so we just continue on.
It's coming regardless.
Yeah, it'll get
One way or
sorted
another,
out,
it's
so. Okay, anything else from any members here? So this was just an opportunity because we just want to catch up any of those updates so that we can sort of like, okay, this point on, we start fresh. Okay, I'll call for look for a motion to adjourn, please. By Councillor Bateman. Any debate on that? All those in favor? Oppose? Okay, carried unanimously, and thank you very much, everyone, for being with us.